So about 15 years ago, Steve Jobs gave us this, and about 7 years ago, Apple gave us this. And we now have the dawn of what everybody is describing as the golden age of audio. The question that I have is, why is it all crime podcasts? Malcolm, why are there so many crime podcasts?
Well, no, Jacob should start with this.
Okay, you go first, Jacob.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Malcolm. Well, I think in any new medium, things that are in familiar genres get a foothold first, and I mean, crime novels, the first paperback novels, inexpensive literature, a lot of them are mystery, crime, thrillers. It's a genre that has key aspects of storytelling that just work. The cliffhanger endings, the suspense, obviously violence. There's subjects that people are inherently fascinated with. Part of what we're trying to, we don't turn up our nose, even though we're sometimes known as the highbrow podcast company. We don't turn up our nose at things that are entertaining. We're just trying to figure out how to do versions of it with real value. The thing that worries me about the true crime podcast as a genre, and if, as a side note, if any of you watched Only Murders in the Building, the Steve Martin show was a fantastic satire on kind of the culture of true crime podcasts. But they're true stories. They have to be journalism, and they have to follow the basic rules of journalism, the ethics, the procedures around information gathering, and just having basic intellectual integrity. And there's been a real problem with a lot of these shows is in that they don't. There's some of them have been plagiarized, and people think I found this story on the internet, I can just retell it. It's just audio, and I think one of the things, we're trying to do a lot of things at Pushkin, but one of the things we're trying to do is bring some kind of common standards to the storytelling. So we've done a couple of true crime podcasts that I think have been great. We did one called Lost Hills, which has now been 2 seasons about murder stories in Malibu, taking Malibu as the location for this, done by a New Yorker writer, Dana Goodyear. It's now been a #1 show for both seasons. It's really good true crime storytelling, but it has literary value and has journalistic quality.
So Malcolm, when how many seasons of revisionist history have you done?
I'm now working on season 7.
So when you got into doing it, AirPods barely existed, and the whole podcasting, the idea of podcasting was barely on anybody's lips. What attracted to you in the first place, and what got you going?
Jacob told me that it would be really easy, which was a lie. And he told me that I would make a lot of money, which was not true. And so no, I was deceived into it.
I see. And so you just kept going for 7 years until you saw the light, or what keeps you
Well,
going?
it turns out to be really fun. It is not easy. It is more lucrative now, thankfully, than it was in the beginning. But no, it turns out to be, it is just, the longer I do it, the more I realize that it's a radically different kind of storytelling. Mm-hmm. So it's almost as if, I thought what I was doing was just another version of book writing, only I was going to speak it. And then I realized, actually, no, it's like I got a completely different career. And that was quite exhilarating because I'm so old that I was in need of, additional enthusiasm.
And how does the storytelling different from what you do when you write articles or books?
They're, because in a certain sense the stakes are low. So if I have an a fun conversation with someone that you can listen to, if both parties are enjoying themselves, and if there's something funny or unusual or weird about the way things are expressed, or you're as a listener, you're game, you're all there. And the page, none of that would matter, right?
Right.
A fun conversation represented in print, it's just like, why would you read that? So in that sense, the bar is lower. And the bar is lower because audio privileges emotion and character, and print privileges sort of much more analytical stuff. Mm-hmm. So it just pushes you in a different direction. Like there's a episode that I'm working on now for season 7, which is, it's all about, I've become obsessed with magic wand experiments. A magic wand experiment is the experiment that you could do if I gave you a magic wand, when you could wave away all practical, ethical, financial, laws of nature constraints. So all I did was I called up a bunch of smart people and said, okay, what's your magic wand? It turns out every smart person has a magic wand. And it's just a series of me having these increasingly preposterous conversations with people about the things they could do if they could wave a magic wand.
Like, for example?
Like, I called this woman who studies child development. She said, well, what I really want to do is I want to take 1,000 newborn baby boys, cut off their penises, and attach them to 1,000 newborn baby girls. And I want to have the kids, the boys without a penis, everyone thinks it's a girl, and so the parents raise it as a girl, and the boy thinks he's a she for the first 5 years, and vice versa on the other side. And we will settle once and for all whether parents have any impact whatsoever on the gender identity of the child. Now, it's a really interesting idea, put that way.
Yeah, I got it.
Can't really, it's weird on the page.
Yep.
But
It's a little weird as you say,
Yeah.
but
But
in
I
both
feel like
instances,
I feel like it works.
It's more like the magic missing wand.
That's right. But then they got even more ridiculous.
Right.
And
You mean other magic wands?
oh, she's just one of 5.
I
I call it, because then you get in the spirit of things. You're like, oh yeah. So who would I call next? So I called one of the world's leading experts on twins, because you want to have, everyone does the twin study, but then what's the twin study you could do if you could like wave a magic wand, right? So I call up, one of this woman who's one of the world's leading experts. I was like, okay, don't tell me the twin study that you've done. Tell me the one that you could do if I gave you all. And her answer's really cool, which is, should I tell you?
Yeah, of course.
So I had to go through with her like 4 different iterations of weird twin studies. And when twin studies people talk, you quickly get lost because you can't use it in audio. You can do it on the page. You can't do it and use it in audio because they're talking about, well, of course, that means you've got 4 sets of fraternal twins and 4 sets of identical twins, and we mix them, and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, you can't keep it straight. So finally I got her to give me a simple one, which was, she got really interested in mixed-race parents who have fraternal twins, one of whom is white and one of whom is black. And she would have them in her class, and by accident, she would talk to them, and she would realize they had very different life experiences. Now, there's a case where you have same parents, same environment, same upbringing, but we varied your skin color, and they've already got divergent outcomes. But we haven't kept genes standard, have we?
No.
So her magic wand is identical twins, where one is white and one is black.
But then they wouldn't be identical.
Well, identical except for skin color.
Gotcha.
See, that's the magic wand.
Gotcha.
Right? And she's like, that's an amazing experiment.
Right.
That's an experiment. So this is an example of something where if we had 1 million twins in this condition,
I know where you're going with this.
we can stand up in America and we can say, okay, is racism over or is it not? Right? So the Supreme Court, for example, thinks it's over. Right? That's why they threw out the Voting Rights Act a couple years ago. Lots of people walking around thinks it's over. A lot of people think it's not over. Is it over? I have no idea. I know it's less than it was 20 years ago. How much less? We have no idea. If we have 1 million twins in this condition making their way through America, where everything is the same except for skin color, we can answer that question. Like, that's exciting.
Gotcha.
Now, that works. It works because the woman's who I'm talking to she's super serious, and I'm like, wait, what? Like,
Right. She's thought about this.
on the page, again, it's harder to do that, to
Right.
capture the spirit of it.
Right.
Yeah. There's something, it just occurred to me while you're talking, Malcolm, it's amazing you have succeeded in audio because no one uses hand gestures more in storytelling than you do. It's like this, you're going to pounce, you're like, cover your eyes. You can't hear that on the podcast. But, the thing, I think a lot about, what makes a good podcast, what makes a good TV television documentary, what makes a good book. And one of the things that's just fundamentally different, but easy to miss about TV versus podcasts is the role of the imagination of the listener. When you watch filmed entertainment of any kind, someone's imagination has already determined how every scene looks. And if you were talking about a magic wand experiment, there'd be some way to visualize that. Maybe they'd animate it, you would dramatize it, you do certain things. But you as the viewer receive that as someone else's maybe brilliant idea, maybe not so brilliant idea. When you're just listening, your own imagination is personalizing the story visually inside your head. And every time on Malcolm's show, if he's any of these episodes, I mean, you're driving a car around a track, you are running around a golf club. Take examples of a couple of the favorite episodes of your show. Everyone listening sees that picture and creates that picture in their head a little differently. And I think that the way podcasts and audiobooks is the style we're trying to make them activate and trigger the imagination is really a key to why they're having this renaissance right now. And Michael, to that little thing you pointed to, those AirPods, that it's inside your head is really a big difference. Seems like a small difference. What's the difference? You're listening with headphones, you're not listening with headphones. When you're listening with headphones, you're isolated in a certain way, and you're not listening with other people. It's not like having the radio on in a room. You don't come and go. You're intensely engaged imaginatively, even if you're doing something else at the same time, which most people are when they're listening.
Yeah. The thing I like about the audio renaissance of the moment is it is curbing video overreach. Now, so video overreach would be any medium, once it gets fat and happy and super profitable, tends to expand beyond the legitimate borders of its creative brief. So you're doing film stars because we can tell like really amazing stories we can make movies, we can bring the Wild West to life. Love it, right? But then they start creeping and they start like colonizing whole areas of storytelling where we don't need the image, right? Like half of, don't get me started on documentaries, but half of all documentaries don't need to be documentaries. You don't need to show me, you know what I mean? You have nothing to show me. You show me like one still picture and then the guy says, this is London, 1938. Well, all right. Do I need the image? I don't need the image. Tell me the story about London in 1938. If you're not going to bring it to life, then you're just wasting my time. And you just spent like, $10 million doing the video portion of something that I'm really only listening to. Yeah. So there are what we're doing is we're reclaiming the stories that are truly best told through the ear.
So let me ask you this question. Or both of you, and you in particular, Jacob. So you dupe Malcolm into doing this. But before you even do that, you'd been involved with podcasting for how long? How long have you been doing this now for at Slate?
We started at Slate in about 2004, so right at the beginning. And as with a lot of new technology, there's this initial wave of enthusiasm, which there was about podcasting in 2003, 2004. Little trivia quiz item I'll give you. Twitter was founded as a podcast company. It was supposed to be a podcast directory because people thought podcasts were going to be so big that they were going to need something, we still kind of need it, but to sort out like what podcasts to listen to. But like a lot of these things, Bill Gates used to say some version of this, people overestimate the amount of change that happens in 2 or 3 years, but underestimate the amount of change that happens in 10 years. Kind of podcasts happened, they didn't really take off in a lot of ways. 10 years later, they came roaring back. A lot of people time it to Serial. But at Slate, we'd been making them the whole time because they were fun. We weren't making, for the most part, the revisionist history type podcasts with elements of narrative and using a lot of different sonically rich parts, we were, doing more conversational shows, which are still a huge part of podcasting. But I kind of fell in love with this medium because what you could do creatively, what you could do emotionally, the kind of relationship you had with listeners, which is very different from what you have in journalism, writing. And for one thing, it's a lot more positive. But anyway, so I tried to get my friends involved to fall in love with audio too. And you notice I didn't deny Malcolm's story. It's a slight exaggeration, but it's basically true. I said it's not that hard. I mean, but of course it is if you take it seriously and do it well. It is hard. But I went to the writers I most admire, including Michael Lewis and a few others, some of whom are friends of mine, and said this is worth trying. And I think what pretty much all of them have found is that this new medium challenges them as writers, opens up opportunities, lets them do something that's different from what they, as masters of their craft as writers, have been doing in print. I mean, maybe kind of kicking it back over to Malcolm, I wonder if you would say a few words on how your writing has changed and how writing, for the ear is different from writing for the page.
It is different. It encourages you to think a lot more about character and emotion, the things that audio does well. It makes you look in different places for stories. It's kind of gotten the reporter, what happens over the life of a reporter, I think, or at least in my case, was, if you met me in my 20s, my reporting had a lot of energy. I talked to tons and tons of people, more than I needed to. And then I talked to less and less, I got more kind of efficient and lazier. And then with podcasts, you actually have to talk to, you can't just, you can just read a book and then just say what's in the book. You have to call a person and tape them and go to all this trouble. And it reminds you about how much fun reporting is and how you learn all of this. You learn, like the thing in I wish Michael Lewis was here. He is here. Was up here and could speak to this. But the thing I've always noticed is that the hardest thing as a writer is that you want to find out about X. And so you know what the minimum number of interviews is to find out about X. Say it's 3. And you know what the maximum number of interviews is, which is any person who could conceivably speak to that. Let's say it's 20. So the question is, between 3, that's your range, 3 to 20, how far do you go? Now, as you get more adept as a writer, you tend to minimize the number of, you stop at 3 or you stop at 4, because you think, I can make it work. It's fine, right? Easy. In podcasting, you can't do that. So in podcasting, you're forced, when you're telling audio stories, you find yourself doing 10. And then what you learn is, I had forgotten how much amazing stuff there was between 3 and 10. So to give you an example, one of my episodes this season, I got down, for reasons that are too complicated to go into, I became obsessed with Will and Grace. And
The TV show.
TV show.
Got it.
So there's an obvious number of people who you want to talk to. The creators, the actors, the blah, blah, blah. But I got it in my head that I really wanted to talk to, and now I've forgotten his name, the NBC guy.
Warren Littlefield?
Warren Littlefield. So I tracked down Warren Littlefield, and like I said, if I was writing about it, I would never have called Warren Littlefield. But I was like, I need another voice. He seems like he might be interesting. I call him up, and I'm talking to him, and about halfway through the interview, he starts to tell this just fantastic story about how they all, well, I should back up. Is this interesting?
Yeah, I am. I'm interested.
So
We'll
they
find
all
out in a
hate
minute. Yeah.
Don Olermeyer.
Yeah.
So the guy who was Warren Littlefield's boss at NBC was a guy named Don Olermeyer, who was OJ's best friend. So I'm talking to the two guys who started Will and Grace, and they're talking about the early days at NBC, blah, blah, blah. And then one of them says, and that expletive, Don Olermeyer, and then just starts talking again about something else. I was like, wait a second, they really hate Don Olermeyer. Who cares about Don Olermeyer? So then I'm talking to Warren Littlefield, and he was talking about, they came to me with Will and Grace, I loved the idea, but I knew Don would have a problem. And then he talks about how tried to get this idea, because it's a show about, a a gay man on television in America in 1997, right? And living with a straight woman, like, and Don is having none of it. So he spends like a year trying to strategize to get this past Don. And he starts out just by lying to Don, and Don just doesn't really catch on. But finally, the pilot's they have to air the pilot, and Don thinks that's his moment to kill it. And he makes Don think that, yeah, it's like, I don't think it's that good, whatever. He's trying to downplay it, but he's like really concerned it gets over. So they have the big, all the top NBC executives are in the room. They're going to watching the pilot episode of Will and Grace. And what's the guy's name? Wright.
Bob Wright.
Bob Wright, who's the head of the whole company, comes down from New York City to watch the pilot. So it's Don, the big cheese Bob Wright, and like Warren Littlefield, like nervous. They play the first episode. There's dead silence. And Warren Littlefield's like, and Don Olmo's like, yes. And then Bob Wright gets up with a serious look on his face. He says, that is the finest piece of television I have seen in my life.
And so it goes.
Like, my point is, like, that's what you get when you go 3 to 10.
Right.
Right? And it just reminded me about how fantastic.
Right. Wow. So if, the whole industry now is what, 15, 18 years old, whatever it is. Do you think, are we in this, are we in second inning, fourth inning? Is it silent movie, black and white movie, Technicolor? Where does this go? And are audiobooks part of that trajectory, or is it a whole separate thing? And where do you think the podcasting industry or formats go creatively, and how does audiobooks fit into that whole thing?
I mean, those are really interesting questions we think about all the time. In terms of the development of the medium, I remember we got Michael to kind of advise us and help us when we were starting the company, because he's been in book publishing and film and TV and music and has like a deep range of experience around different media. And you started listening to a lot of podcasts. And I remember you saying, I can't find anything else good to listen to. This was like a couple of years ago. You were like, I've been through everything and I'm out of stuff.
Yep.
And that surprised me, because the stories, people kept doing the stories. There are now 750,000 podcasts. There are now 1 million podcasts. But in a way, I think what you were saying was really right. There were a very large number of podcasts, the way, there are a lot of books in the Library of Congress. But it doesn't mean that there's something, you want to immerse yourself in. There is a lot of high-quality audio content being created and distributed in podcast form, which to me just means it's supported by advertising rather than sold for a fee. But I think we're still relatively early. There hasn't been the kind of standardization you tend to see in industries. There hasn't been standardization around lengths. There hasn't been standardization around, the number of episodes, what's a season. I mean, there'll be more than one genre and more than one way it works, but and part of what's wonderful about the industry now is it is resisting standardization a little bit. And things can be quirky or weird or really different from how everything works. And there are no rules yet. And that's the most fun period, I think, to work in any medium before the rules are set. At the same time, I think we crave the rules because it will mean the industry is mature and more viable. And I think that's coming. So I'd say creatively, we're still in the relatively early phase. With audiobooks, we're not even in the first inning. The pitchers are still warming up in the bullpen, because there's all of this, there are all these techniques that have been developed around podcasting and how you tell an immersive, rich story and the different elements. Malcolm's become completely obsessed with audio archives, which, it's true, are just treasure troves and completely underexplored and underutilized relative to video archives. And a hallmark of a lot of the things we're creating is we find something, some trove of audio material. But you hear the interviews, the way we use music, just the way you bring the sound elements together to tell the story is so natural to the length of a book and the immersive experience of a book that I have to think audiobooks are growing, as they're probably the part of the book business that's growing fastest in commercial terms. But they're still made basically, for the most part, the way they were made 30 years ago or 40 years ago when the Library of Congress distributed them for sight-impaired people. They're an actor or the author reading the text. And part of what we're saying is, wait a minute, if you love podcasts and you love losing yourself in this more complex style of storytelling, why don't you want to do that with books too? And so we've made Malcolm's last 2 books this way. We just made Liar's Poker, Michael Lewis's first book, which hadn't been done in unabridged forms. We didn't go the whole hog because it's a classic and we didn't want to mess with it. But we're making audiobooks as if they were podcasts. And I have to say, from the listener's point of view, it completely works. And once we figure out the business of it, I think it is going to become much more familiar, much more dominant.
Why did you fall in love with it? Why did you become obsessed with it? At what point did the switch flip, so to speak?
I used to watch, maybe it's because I'm a little restless I remember when I was working at the Washington Post and I was this is in the early 90s, and the head of the Washington Post had me join this committee of reporters, and we all met, and he said, well, the reason I've gathered you all together is we have to deal with the fact that, we're trying to deal with the fact that no young people are reading newspapers anymore. And I was like, I think it's time to leave the newspaper business. So I left, and
Thanks for the heads up.
became a magazine writer, and then, the internet happened, and I was like, that's time to go.
Right. So you're just moving along here.
I'm moving, and I would watch, it's as simple as I would be on a subway, and I would see people when I got to New York, when I was on the subway, people were reading books and magazines, and then there was a point where they were all listening to something on their phones. And I was like, well, that's the business I want to be in.
Yeah.
I do think you have to, you have to follow your audience in a certain sense. If they're doing something different, you can't be, you can't be selling newspapers to people who want to hear stories through their ears.
So wasn't that, for example, when you were writing Tipping Point or Blink or one of these books, you thought to yourself, gee whiz, I wish I could insert the voice of whoever it was you were interviewing?
Never occurred to me.
That never really occurred to you at the time?
No.
That wasn't part of the bargain?
No. It's more about all of that. I don't think, was it occurring to anyone? We didn't know, we didn't even have a concept of the idea that you could tell that people would want to buy a compelling story in audio. And, as writers, you so fall in love with this romantic notion of yourself as someone who is committing words to the page. And you realize, actually, you don't have to commit it to the page.
Right.
Well, there's certain things where you just want to hear them. And that includes, obviously, music, but comedy, sports, and it's now at the point where when I read prose on a page about music, it feels like a slightly unnatural act. And then you hear something, and maybe you can talk about a little bit, this audiobook we just did, Miracle and Wonder, which Malcolm did with Paul Simon. There's this category question, and people listen to it and they say, I love it. What is it? Is it a podcast? Is it an audiobook? But what is it?
I don't know. It was like, so I met about 2 years ago, I had lunch with Paul Simon, and because I had gotten his number from somebody, and I said to him, I think we should do something together. And he miraculously said, why not? What would you like to do? And I said...
He was like, can you harmonize?
Yeah. And I said, well, can I just come, me and my friend Bruce, can we just come and hang out with you and record conversations? And he said, well, I'll be in Hawaii. And I said, well, do you think that is discouraging me, or do you think that... And so we went to Hawaii, and every day he drove himself. He's the most un-rock star of all rock stars. We couldn't get the studio we wanted, so we were forced to go to the studio that was way, 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 way up in the hills. So we were, if you know Maui, I'm about to tell it. Do you mind if I name drop magnificently?
Well, wait, just by saying, do you know Maui?
No. I'm going so far beyond, do you know Maui? So no, what I'm going to say is, Maui, the island's like this. The hotels are all here. There's a massive mountain here. We were in a studio that was on the top of the mountain, but to get there, you had to go around the whole island. So it was like an hour and 20-minute drive. So every morning, we pick up Paul, and we drive all the way up. Except for the time when we drove like halfway there, and Paul said, "Oh, I have to go back." We said, "Why?" He said, "I forgot to kiss my wife goodbye." Anyway. The name-dropping story is I can't do it.
Go ahead.
It's too egregious. It's too
Go ahead, do it.
It's really egregious.
You're among friends. This is an intimate audience.
Michael Lewis just told us his date with Princess Diana.
Yeah, come on.
All right.
Doesn't get bigger
All right.
name. Come on.
I'm talking to Oprah. And I tell her this story, and she goes, "You know that my house in Maui is just up the hill, and I have a private road down to the hotels. And if I'd just opened, he just told me I could have opened the private road, and it's 15 minutes as opposed to an hour and a half." It's like, Oprah, of course.
You should have thought of that at the time.
Should have thought of that. Wait, where was I?
You were describing making an audiobook with Paul
Oh, yeah. So,
to bring you back from the heights of Oprah
Oprah,
to
Paul
the
Simon.
to the Paul Simon.
So we just sit with him in the beginning, and he talks for a while, and then we decide, we should be playing some music. So he would, in the beginning, the first conversations, we asked him to play all the songs he listened to when he was a kid, because he has a perfect memory for everything. And then he would just comment on them. And then after a while, we realized the minute he was fantastic to talk to, but the minute he has a guitar in his hand, he just becomes transformed. Of course, he's most comfortable with a guitar in his hand. So at every opportunity, we would try to get him to pick up his guitar and show us something on the guitar. And to Jacob's point, you realize, you don't want to read about that.
Right.
Like this magic moment when he's telling some, crazy story, or showing you something that's full of, in Miracle and Wonder, the best moments are when he's showing something on the guitar, that this is where this came from, or this is what I did to that. And you're hearing it, and you feel like you're in the studio with Paul Simon yourself, right? Because there's, you're having the exact same experience that I had when I was sitting across from him in Hawaii. And then it went on, because he came back, and then we would visit him in Connecticut, and he just it was so much fun. He just was down for it. The one thing I couldn't get him to do, he's married to a musician, Edie Brickell, and he started talking about duets once, and about how, he's like, yeah, but the most interesting and complicated duets I ever do are with Edie, my wife, and we did this one thing. He named some incredible song. It's like, we were just practicing last night, and it was like magic. And I was like, where is she right now? It's like, oh, she's just in the house, 50 feet away. I was like, and he wouldn't.
No?
He wouldn't invite her in.
He made you drive all the way back an hour so that he could kiss her and he wouldn't sing a duet?
Did you tell her about the shortcut? But the thing, if you listen to this thing, it's like just, as Malcolm was saying, like being with Paul Simon for 5 hours. It's like he's over at your house, he's got his guitar, it's very low-key, he's talking about his past. But then there are all these other elements. There's, one of the first chapters is Malcolm theorizing about Paul Simon. Does Malcolm have a theory about Paul Simon? Of course he has a theory about Paul Simon. It's all about the high school in Queens where Carly Simon went to, and why was this place? Why did it produce all of this music? And how did it come out of doo-wop? And so you have kind of Malcolm's idea, then Paul Simon telling you his memories of all this stuff, then Paul Simon playing his guitar, then we talk to other musicians about Paul Simon, about Herbie. We talked to Herbie Hancock. Who else?
The Sting one is still my favorite. So we asked Paul for a list of people we should call who are friends of his, who have interesting things to say about him.
Oprah? No.
No, we didn't go to. So one of them was Sting. So I have a Zoom with Sting. Now, Sting, Paul Simon, not a rock star in the sense of he is a rock star, but he doesn't behave like one. He behaves like if he met Paul Simon and he told you that he was actually your accountant.
Yeah.
You'd be like, oh yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
He's that kind of. He's so down to earth. Sting, not your accountant. So I'm on a Zoom with Sting, and first of all, he's in the close proximity of Zoom, impossibly handsome. And secondly, I was like, where are you? He's like, oh, I'm in a French chateau in the French countryside. I was like, wait, is that a Renoir over your shoulder? It's like, it gives me like a knowing, sting-like look. And then he proceeds to tell a story so perfect, and then I was so I never get intimidated. I was completely intimidated. I was so intimidated, I ended the interview prematurely because I just couldn't think of a possible thing to say that could perfect what he had said. Here's the thing that really touched my heart when he was doing it. So he's telling the story, looking me in the eye with the Renoir right here, telling me this insane story about traveling across country in the early days of police and how they were listening to America. We all come to look for America. That was their theme song on this journey. And ever since then, Paul Simon was his kind of hero. And the story is exquisite. And then, as he's talking to me, I notice that every now and again he glances like this to the side, and I realize he prepared. Which was so magnificent.
Of course he would prepare.
He sting. And you realize,
That's why he stings.
That's why he sting, right? That's why he sting. And then the Herbie Hancock one was great because Herbie Hancock is famously, he's the smartest musician. He's so up here and everyone's down here, and everyone who works with Herbie Hancock always reaches a point where, like, Herbie wants to do something and I can't follow him. He's just on another level. And they all fold their cards and go home. And then Paul Simon collaborates with Herbie Hancock, and Herbie Hancock's telling the story of their collaboration. And he goes, and then at that point I realized Paul Simon was on a level, and I couldn't follow it. And so it was like, every one of these different musicians that we talked to had their own sort of really beautiful perspective on Paul Simon, and you hear all their voices.
Wow. So let me ask you, we'll open it up to the audience, but one question. So I understand how this works when the people you're talking to are living, or even better, are musicians because you want to hear the music. But how does it work when you have no one to talk to at the moment? So for example, with Bomber Mafia or the project you're working on at the moment, do you want to talk about either one of those two for a bit?
Yeah, the one I'm working on now is this book about Tom Bradley, the former mayor of LA, who I have decided is the most interesting politician of the 20th century. And it's a controversial position in Los Angeles. And he's long dead. So it's a combination of, there are many people, though, who are still alive, who speak. And there's a wonderful phrase which was in Jacob's brother's most recent book, where he's talking about Jacob's father, and Joe, Jacob's brother, says of their father that I know him better now than when he was alive, which is, as someone who recently lost my own father, is one of the most incredibly moving things. And I realize there's a great truth in that when people close to you die, you have an opportunity to reflect on who they are. And with the passage of time, your reflections grow more and more, in some cases, profound. And so there's a group of people who are still alive, who remember Tom Bradley, and whose reflections are, as a result, incredibly valuable. He's been gone for 20 years, but so there's that. You had that circle. And then you have Tom Bradley himself left all these tapes of, there are, I don't know, 20, 30 hours of, more than that, of oral histories he left, which I swear no one has listened to except me at this point, or people connected with our project. Because we were the first to digitize the tape, which means if someone listened to them, they haven't listened to them in years. So it's just sitting there. So this is an incredible, we have an abundance. If Tom Bradley were still alive, I'm not even sure what I would ask him, since there's so much stuff out there.
I see.
But so someone from that era, 60s, 70s, 80s, is still very accessible. Now, earlier is harder, but the other thing that's great is there's a sweet spot, all reporters know this, which is there's a point when someone in their life, when they stop caring about the consequences of what they say. So that's not that they are unaware of the consequences. They're aware of them, but they're like, well, it's nothing, it's not going to matter now. So there are all these people we've talked to who are at that stage because they're all in their 70s.
I see.
It's fantastic.
Like, what's to lose? What's to lose?
Yeah. But, when we get pitched an idea for an audiobook or a podcast or have an idea for ourselves, first question is it before 1930? Really, because if it's before the age of recorded sound, you're not going to find things. You're not going to have that archival tape. You're not going to be able to hear it. So you could do an audiobook of a biography of Napoleon, like we could dress it up, there'd be some bells and whistles, but there won't be anything that will really take you there unless we somehow do a dramatization.
It would be like that documentary that Malcolm was describing earlier where they show you a photograph and they do the voice.
Yeah, exactly. The Ken Burns effect. You zoom in and out of on the photograph. I mean, it's not that you can't do anything, but there's no real advantage to doing that in audio. And the second question is, where's the emotion? I've learned this from our producers. When I would interview somebody, I look for the great quote. What was the thing they said that when you pull it out, epitomizes what you're trying to get at and makes news and, it was exciting. They listen for the choke, where someone's voice chokes up. And it might, and usually is not about the most important thing they said. It's something that's a little clue. You hear that cracking of the voice. And it's that emotion that the producers know will resonate with listeners because that puts you there emotionally. So after 1930, emotional content, that's what makes good audio.
I have an expression I use for what I call the three-way cry. The three-way cry, so in an audio interview, there's you, the interviewer, subject, and then the engineer, producer, whoever's listening in. So it's three, it's a triad. And the one-way cry is typically the subject cries. The two-way cry is where the interviewer joins in. The three-way cry is where your engineer, who's not even there, it's like off somewhere else.
Wow.
I had a three-way cry. This I was like, I'm in tears. I look up. I hear the person on the Zoom, see the person on the Zoom sobbing, and then like afterwards, I text the producer, "Are you okay?" She's like, I'm okay. I'm like, a three-way cry, oh my God, this is insane.
We're a very weepy company. It's, I wouldn't have thought that. I wouldn't have thought that would be like a thing that we would, be striving for. And it's not that you're not trying to manipulate people, but you're looking for genuine emotion. And when you have those moments, it's exactly right. And, it's a four-way cry because it's the listener.
Because,
right?
you're going to get the
reaction. Should we take a question from the audience? A couple of questions?
Sure.
This is for Mr. Gladwell. You mentioned when you were moderating, Mr. Lewis, that you don't have any interest in reading your own work. And so, personally, what's it like for you reading an audiobook? Because I believe you read your own narrated.
Oh, well, I read them usually right after I've read them, so it's all very familiar, and it's not painful. If you asked me to redo the audiobook of Tipping Point right now, I think I would rather shoot.
But Malcolm, it'll be easy, and you make a lot of money. Yeah, sorry.
Hi, Mr. Gladwell. I'm a really, really, really big fan. I have a throwback question. Ever since Outliers, I read it a decade ago, I've had this question for you. What's your 10,000 hours? I'm dying to know. How did you become who you are? What is your 10,000 hours?
Oh. Well, I have a variety of different answers to that question, but the one I'm favoring at the moment is that I come from a family of people who are almost all uniformly bad storytellers. And so my father was so terrible that my mother's earliest memories of my father when they were courting, as they would say back in the 50s, is that he would stand up at these dinners that they would have with their friends to tell a story and then get halfway through and just lose his way. And she was just completely mortified, why am I with this guy? You can't even... he would routinely tell jokes growing up, and then he couldn't even get to the punchline. Would just somehow forget, and his voice would trail off, and then he would start laughing. It was just like, and then my brother was incredibly frustrating to me because although he could do anything, he couldn't explain anything. So this is my big brother, I'd try and learn things from him, and he couldn't tell me, he didn't know how to organize. It just was maddening. So my entire life I was surrounded by, growing up, people who just were botching it in my own eyes. And so from the earliest time, I was first just in my own head as a kid. I'm just like retelling the story of no, you don't want to do that. No, Daddy, the story goes this way. The punchline happens here, don't. So I'm like, all of these things, these kind of lessons are being hammered into me, starting at around probably 4 or 5, and right up until, 2 weeks ago I was home and was forced to deal with this issue. So, I think that's probably it.
Well, you're like the best storyteller ever, so I love you.
Last question.
Wow, last question. No pressure. I first want to say something about I just can't get over how much content, writing, audio, and otherwise is represented in this room at this moment. It's kind of phenomenal that I'm a native son, and so I don't think I've ever been in a room in New Orleans where there was this many storytellers in print or audio or otherwise, assembled here. And something kind of much lighter. Recently, my daughter went on a student for a day at an elite private school here. And when she came home, she told me, it's like, man, I went to their cafeteria and it was like being in a restaurant, getting all the food from all these different restaurants. And immediately, I said, well, I have a podcast for you. Because I feel like we can't really prove that the schools that we pay for are in fact better than public schools. And in fact, in New Orleans, if you go by rankings, which you've done a good job of questioning rankings as well, then the schools here that are regularly producing students who go to top schools are actually not the private schools, or it's not only the private schools. And so this question that we're having, this dialogue that we're having, is something I feel, Malcolm, that you have taken issue with in many different ways, and bear with me. Like, you have this axe to grind with Harvard and elite institutions. They only let so many people in, but they have a gazillion-dollar endowment. You bring up, you did the whole thing on Dillard, another local institution, and rankings, and how the fix is in, basically. So my question is in this pursuit of this more fair and equitable and democratic society, is it better to send your kids to schools that cost tuition or that are elite schools? Do we want to reproduce that structure, that way of doing things? And I've been dying to know what your answers are. What can we do, or how should we approach that? Because you've done so many different angles of the story, even like the kid from East LA, or from LA, I don't know if it's East or South, but you know what I'm talking about. So what can we do? Is it better, one, to send kids is it better to go to private schools? Are private schools better than public schools? All of them? And two, what can we as a society, I feel like I'm already decided that we need to come up with a way that we educate our population that actually produces democracy.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is that, a private school is not, even before you ask the question of whether it's better or worse, it's more important to say that to ask the question, is it easier or harder? So the point of a private school is that it's easy. So it's easy, if I limit my student population to the children of the privilege, and I charge a lot of money, which gives me enormous resources to deal with every eventuality. And if I am, quote unquote, selective, that is to say I can keep out anyone who I think is going to cause me a headache, then my job is really easy. If you're in a public school where you can do none of those things, your job is really hard. Now, there are places in the world where we consider it honorable, if you're in the educational business, not to shrink from difficulty, but to embrace it. We consider that's what the job of a school system is. And those who are essentially free riders, who just siphon off the resources and the easy cases, would be treated with a good deal less respect. In this country, we've flipped that, and we've decided to make as educational heroes those who have chosen the cushiest path. And we've decided to spend an enormous amount of time and attention dumping on that portion of the educational system that deals with the hardest, has the hardest job. Don't ask me why that is. It would be like if I called up Ferrari and gave them a medal for all of your contributions to creating great automobiles, affordable transportation for the people of this world, Mr. Ferrari. No, he sells cars for $2 million. It's just not that hard to make a car for $2 million. If you can guarantee me $2 million for the car, I can make a car as good as Ferrari for $2 million, right? You know what's hard? Is making a Volkswagen for $35,000. That's hard, right? So maybe we should just start by ending this kind of endless adulation of those who occupy the 96th, 97th, and 98th, 99th percentile of the educational hierarchy. That would help. I don't have infinite time here, but my, long-standing quick fix to this is that it works for college, but it would work for high schools too, is you can go wherever you want, but it should be illegal to ever disclose the name of the institution that you attended. So it solves all the problems. So if you want to cheat your way into USC, I don't care. You think you give a better time, fine. But once you're out of there, you can never tell another soul that you went to USC.
Thank you, Jacob and Malcolm.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.